Pushpin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling and romantic stories that will keep your heart racing. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. It was New Year's Eve, and the city glittered with excitement. Streetlights twinkled like 1,000 tiny stars, fireworks were being tested in distant parks, and every cafe seemed to overflow with laughter and celebration. But for Emma Harris, the night was quiet, too quiet. She had spent the last few years devoted entirely to her work as a secretary at one of the city's most powerful businesses, managing schedules, emails, and endless phone calls. While her friends had scattered across the city to glamorous parties or cozy gatherings, she had resigned herself to spending the evening alone, bundled in her apartment with takeout and a bottle of champagne she would probably never open. Emma's apartment overlooked the skyline, the neon lights reflecting off the glass windows like a promise of a world she wasn't part of. Her phone lay silent on the table beside her, save for the occasional notification from colleagues wishing her a happy new year. She sighed and sank deeper into the couch, pulling a soft blanket over her shoulders. Maybe tonight was meant to be simple, uneventful. Maybe a quiet night was exactly what she needed. But fate had other plans. The clock ticked closer to midnight. Emma glanced at the golden numbers glowing on her digital clock, 11:57 p.m. She rubbed her eyes and muttered to herself, 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes of boredom before it's 2026. She chuckled at the thought of how dramatic she must sound, talking to herself as if anyone was listening. And indeed, someone, or something, was listening, though she had no idea. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Emma froze, her heart skipping a beat. Who could possibly be visiting her at this hour? She rarely had guests, and certainly not at midnight on New Year's Eve. "Hello," she called softly, her voice trembling slightly. No response. Just another knock, this one more insistent, yet measured, almost deliberate. Curiosity won over caution. She rose from the couch and padded to the door, peering through the peephole. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Standing there, in the dim glow of the hallway, was someone she never expected to see. It was Alexander Romano, the infamous mafia boss whose name alone sent shivers down the spines of people in the city's underground circles. Dark, sharp-featured, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to command attention even without a word, he stood there with a faint smile that made her knees weak. Emma's mind raced. Why is he here? What does he want? She took a hesitant step back, her hand hovering over the lock. Before she could speak, the door opened on its own. Alexander's presence was overwhelming. His aura filled the small apartment like an invisible tide. He didn't push his way in, didn't demand anything. He simply stood there, calm and collected, yet undeniably imposing. "I know it's late," he said, his voice deep and smooth, "and I apologize for the intrusion. But I couldn't let you spend New Year's alone." Emma blinked, stunned. She wanted to say something, anything, but words failed her. Her usual composure was nowhere to be found. She had read about men like him in newspapers and gossip columns, men whose power could crush entire businesses with a flick of a hand, men whose presence alone was terrifying. And yet, here he was, in her apartment, for her. "Why you must be mistaken," she stammered. "I don't know why you'd even be here." Alexander's smile softened, just a hint, enough to disarm her further. "I know you think that, and I won't argue. But let's just say I have my reasons. Now, may I come in?" Before she could protest, he stepped inside. The apartment, usually quiet and empty, suddenly felt alive. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified, the ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant echoes of fireworks outside. Alexander moved with the kind of confidence that made it impossible to ignore him. He didn't sit, didn't lounge, he simply stood, surveying the room, as if memorizing every detail. Emma felt an unusual warmth rising in her chest, not fear, not anger, but something far more complicated. "Would you like some champagne?" she asked, surprising herself with her own attempt at hospitality. He nodded, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blush. "I thought you might, and I insist we toast to a better year, a year that's only just beginning." As Emma poured 2 glasses, she couldn't shake the surreal feeling of what was happening. She had imagined countless scenarios of meeting someone like Alexander Romano, but none of them had included him showing up at her door, at midnight, personally making sure she wasn't alone. They clinked glasses just as the clock struck midnight. Outside, the city erupted in a symphony of fireworks and celebration. Inside, Emma felt like the entire world had narrowed to this single, extraordinary moment. "To new beginnings," Alexander said softly. His hand brushed hers briefly as he took his glass, sending an electric shock through her that she couldn't explain. Emma smiled, a little nervously, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this man, really? Why did he care about her night? And more importantly, what did it mean that he was here, now, in her apartment, at the very start of the new year? She didn't know the answers yet. But one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The fireworks outside continued to explode in vibrant colors, reflecting off the windows, lighting up their faces. Alexander looked at her, his expression unreadable yet full of promise. Emma felt something inside her stir, a mixture of excitement, fear, and anticipation. And in that instant, alone in her apartment with the most dangerous man in the city, Emma realized that this New Year's Eve was just the beginning of a story she could never have imagined. Little did she know, the night was far from over, and the midnight knock had set into motion events that would change everything, her life, her heart, and even her understanding of trust, danger, and desire. Emma couldn't believe what had just happened. Alexander Romano, the city's most feared and enigmatic mafia boss, was standing in her living room, talking to her like they were old acquaintances, and she couldn't decide whether to be terrified, flustered, or intrigued. He poured himself another glass of champagne, and as the golden liquid caught the light, she realized how unusual it was to see someone so powerful behave so casually in her small, modest apartment. "You don't have to pretend to be fine spending New Year's alone," he said softly, as though reading her thoughts, his voice carrying that calm authority that made people obey without question. Emma swallowed, unsure how to respond, because everything inside her wanted to run, yet another part of her, the part that had been starving for attention, excitement, and maybe just a hint of danger, wanted to stay. I'm fine," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, yet Alexander shook his head gently, his eyes dark and piercing. "No one should be alone tonight." "Not anyone," he said, stepping closer, and Emma felt the heat from his presence without understanding why it affected her so much. She noticed the faint scent of his cologne, subtle but intoxicating, and the way his tailored suit clung to his broad shoulders, emphasizing strength she had only ever read about in tabloids and business papers. Her pulse quickened. I don't know why you would care," she admitted honestly, her hands twisting nervously around the stem of her champagne glass. Alexander's lips curved into a half smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes but suggested amusement and intent at the same time. "I care because you matter," he said simply, and she almost laughed, thinking that surely, she must have misheard, or that someone else had replaced the man she thought she knew only through newspaper headlines. He didn't give her time to respond before he added, "You work hard, you give your time and energy to others, and yet, you forget to take care of yourself. That ends tonight." Emma's breath caught. It wasn't the words alone. It was the certainty behind them, the quiet command that made it impossible to argue, that made her feel like she was suddenly under a spell. She found herself sitting down on the edge of her couch, unable to stop staring at him, watching the subtle movements of a man who seemed to carry the weight of an empire on his shoulders but chose, for reasons she couldn't understand, to be here, in her apartment, with her. The fireworks outside continued, lighting up the skyline, but inside, time seemed suspended. Alexander moved closer, sitting on the arm of the couch beside her, careful not to crowd her but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You've had a long year," he said quietly. "I want to make sure the first moments of the new one aren't lonely." She couldn't look away. Her mind raced with questions. Why her? Why now? And yet, deep down, she wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that someone as untouchable as Alexander could have noticed her, thought of her, and come all this way to ensure she wasn't alone. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration that made her fingers tremble slightly. I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice barely audible. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and the touch was so unexpected, so intimate, that she shivered involuntarily. "Then don't say anything," he replied, his eyes locking with hers, holding her gaze in a way that made it impossible to look away. "Tonight, no words are necessary. Just be." And she did. She let herself simply sit there, feeling his presence, letting her racing heart calm ever so slightly in the warmth of the moment. The clock ticked past 12, and outside, the city erupted in celebration, but inside, Emma and Alexander shared a quiet world of their own, where nothing else seemed to matter. Then he spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper. There's something about the first moments of a year that set the tone for everything that follows. I want to start this one with you, Emma. Her heart skipped a beat, and she noticed that he had used her name, not just a casual reference, but something deliberate, personal, and grounding. She wanted to protest, to tell him she didn't understand, that this wasn't real, that he couldn't possibly care for someone like her, but she didn't. There was a magnetic pull, an invisible force that made her lean just a fraction closer, drawn in by the aura of danger, confidence, and unexpected tenderness he exuded. Alexander noticed, of course, and his half-smile deepened, the kind that made her stomach flip in ways she didn't even know were possible. He didn't speak for a while, just watched her, and in that silence, Emma felt a curious mixture of comfort and suspense. She wanted to ask him how he could possibly care, what his intentions were, but the words died in her throat as he extended his hand slowly, deliberately, as if offering an unspoken promise rather than a gesture of formality. She hesitated, but eventually, she placed her hand in his, marveling at the warmth and strength contained in it. Tonight, he said softly, is not about business, not about threats, not about power. It's about you and me, just for tonight. The words made her pulse race and her thoughts spin, but she nodded, unable to articulate why she trusted him, or why she wanted to. Alexander leaned in just slightly, close enough that she could feel the faint brush of his breath, and she caught herself holding hers, waiting, suspended in a moment that seemed to stretch infinitely. Outside, fireworks continued to explode, the city celebrating the new year, oblivious to the quiet, electric tension in this small apartment. Alexander's eyes held hers, and in them, she saw a complexity she couldn't begin to understand. Danger, desire, calculation, and an odd, undeniable softness reserved only for her. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, an unexplainable thrill that made her both nervous and excited, terrified yet strangely safe. I don't know what's going to happen, she admitted, her voice trembling. But I feel like something has already started. Alexander's hand tightened slightly around hers, reassuring, grounding. It has, he said, his voice firm and yet gentle. And we'll see where it leads, together. She exhaled, letting herself sink into the moment, realizing that the night had taken a turn she never could have predicted, that this New Year's Eve would be etched into her memory forever. And as the city outside roared with celebration, inside, Emma Harris felt the first stirrings of a story that would intertwine danger, romance, and secrets in ways she had never imagined, all beginning with a knock at the door, a mafia boss, and a midnight promise she wasn't ready to define yet. The minutes stretched on, but inside Emma's apartment, it felt like time had slowed to a crawl, the world outside fading into irrelevance as Alexander's presence consumed every corner of her mind. She couldn't stop glancing at him, trying to decipher the contradictions he embodied, dangerous yet gentle, powerful yet attentive, intimidating yet oddly comforting, and the more she looked, the more she realized how little she truly knew about the man who had just appeared at her door, changing everything in an instant. Alexander, on the other hand, seemed calm, almost detached, but there was a faint intensity in his eyes whenever they met hers that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. He poured them both another glass of champagne without asking, and Emma noticed the deliberate care in his movements, each gesture precise and controlled, a reflection of the power he wielded outside these walls. You know, he said casually, as though the weight of his reputation and the danger he carried were irrelevant, people often assume I'm untouchable, that I'm cold and unreachable, but the truth is, I notice things. Small things that matter. And tonight, I noticed you. His words hit her with a jolt, both flattering and confusing. She had always imagined Alexander Romano as a man far removed from ordinary life, untouchable and unknowable, and yet here he was, speaking directly to her, acknowledging her existence in a way that felt impossible yet real. Emma tried to respond, her throat dry, but all she could manage was a whisper, "Why me?" He gave her a slow, knowing smile, leaning back slightly yet keeping his eyes locked on hers. "Because, Emma," he said, emphasizing her name as if it held some hidden power, "you've always been more than you let on. You're smart, capable, and surprisingly resilient. I respect that, and I want to see more of it." Her heart raced, a mixture of fear, excitement, and disbelief swirling inside her. She had never had anyone speak to her like this, not with such intensity, not with such directness, and certainly not someone like Alexander Romano, a man whose name alone could topple empires. She felt drawn to him despite herself, a gravitational pull she didn't understand but couldn't resist. I don't know what to say, she admitted, her voice trembling as she set down her glass. Alexander tilted his head slightly, studying her as though trying to read the truth behind her carefully measured expression. Then don't, he replied softly. Tonight isn't about words. It's about presence, about acknowledging the moment. Life is fleeting, Emma. Opportunities to feel, to connect, to experience something real, they're rare. And this is one of them. His gaze was so intense, so focused, that Emma felt herself melting under the weight of it, her usual defenses crumbling. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't know him, that this was insane, but every instinct in her body told her to stay, to listen, to trust this strange and powerful man who had appeared at the most unlikely moment in her life. She took a tentative step closer, almost subconsciously, and Alexander didn't move back. Instead, he shifted slightly, just enough to close the distance between them without overwhelming her, and the proximity made her hyper-aware of every detail, the faint scent of his cologne, the warmth radiating from his body, the subtle strength in his hand when he brushed against hers. For a moment, the outside world didn't exist. There were no fireworks, no city skyline, no distant shouts of celebration. There was only Alexander and the unspoken tension that had ignited between them. Emma, he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur, there's something you need to understand about me. I don't offer trust lightly, I don't give my attention freely, and I certainly don't let people in, not easily. But tonight, I'm doing all of that for you. Her breath caught. She wanted to question him, to doubt, but the sincerity in his eyes and the calm authority in his tone made it impossible to do anything but listen. She realized, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that her life had just shifted on an axis she couldn't yet comprehend. She wanted to run, to protect herself from the potential danger, from the inevitable complications of being close to a man like Alexander Romano, yet another part of her, the part that longed for excitement, for connection, for something beyond mundane routine, wanted to stay, wanted to explore the inexplicable pull she felt toward him. Alexander noticed her hesitation, her internal struggle written across her face, and he reached out, gently placing his hand on hers. The contact was electrifying, sending a shiver up her spine that had nothing to do with the winter chill outside. It's okay to feel uncertain, he said softly, his thumb brushing against her knuckles in a gesture both protective and intimate. It's okay to be afraid. But fear isn't the enemy. It's a signal that you're about to step into something new, something significant. Something that could change everything. Emma swallowed hard, her mind racing with questions and doubts, yet she felt a strange calm wash over her, a trust she couldn't explain but didn't want to fight. She realized that this was a turning point, a moment where her life could diverge into a path she had never imagined, and somehow, Alexander Romano, dangerous, powerful, unpredictable, was at the center of it. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted, her voice barely audible, though she knew it was a truth she had to acknowledge. Alexander's gaze softened, and he gave her a small, reassuring smile. Trust isn't given, Emma. It's earned, and I don't expect you to give it all at once. Just let tonight happen. Let us exist in this moment without judgment, without expectation. Just presence. Emma nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words sink in, understanding that despite the chaos that could come from being involved with someone like him, she wanted to embrace this night, this moment, this rare connection. They sat in a silence that was rich with unspoken understanding, the kind of silence that spoke louder than any words, filled with the electricity of proximity, the anticipation of what could follow, and the undeniable reality of two worlds colliding. As another round of distant fireworks lit up the sky, Alexander reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face once more, his touch lingering just long enough to leave her breathless. Emma realized that she didn't know where this night would lead, didn't know what dangers or complications would arise from being in the presence of a man like Alexander Romano, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't care. For now, she wanted to live in this moment, to feel the tension, the thrill, the possibility, and to explore the connection that had begun with a simple knock at midnight, a gesture of concern, and the undeniable pull between them. The night stretched ahead of them, full of unspoken promises, hidden desires, and the fragile tension of two people standing at the edge of something extraordinary, and Emma Harris, for the first time, let herself believe that the impossible might just be real, that danger could feel safe, and that the most feared man in the city had chosen her for reasons she might never fully understand, but reasons she was suddenly eager to discover. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, each second filled with an electric tension that neither Emma nor Alexander could ignore. She couldn't help but notice the subtle details about him that both fascinated and intimidated her, the sharpness of his jawline, the way his eyes flickered with calculated awareness, the controlled rhythm of his movements that betrayed a life spent always being in command. And yet, beneath that veneer of power and danger, there was a softness, a consideration in the way he looked at her, the way he listened, the way his presence seemed to demand her attention without forcing it. Emma shifted slightly on the couch, aware of the closeness between them, aware of the faint brush of his hand against hers when he reached for his champagne, aware of the faint warmth radiating from him that seemed to seep into her very bones. She wondered how it was possible that someone so dangerous, so untouchable in the eyes of the world, could make her feel both terrified and completely safe at the same time. "You're quiet," Alexander observed, his voice low and smooth, carrying a subtle edge that made her pulse race. She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the jumble of emotions swirling inside her. I don't know what to say," she admitted, looking down at her hands. He shook his head gently, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Then don't," he replied. "Tonight isn't about words. Tonight is about presence, about feeling. You're feeling, aren't you?" She couldn't deny it. Every fiber of her being was alert, every nerve ending alive, every heartbeat echoing in response to his nearness. I am," she whispered, almost inaudibly, and he nodded approvingly, as if her admission confirmed something he had already known. Alexander's gaze softened, and he leaned back slightly, observing her with a mixture of intensity and curiosity. "Emma," he began, his tone deliberate, "there's a world most people never see. A world where power dictates every decision, where danger lurks in every shadow, and trust is the rarest currency. I live in that world, constantly aware of the stakes, the risks, the consequences. And yet, tonight, I want to step out of it, if only for a few hours, to exist in this moment with you." Her breath caught at the gravity in his words, at the implication that despite his notorious reputation, he had chosen her, chosen this night, chosen to lower the walls he had so carefully built around himself. She felt a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration, unable to reconcile the man before her with the headlines she had read, the rumors she had heard, the stories whispered behind closed doors. And yet, the reality was undeniable. He was here, with her, and the chemistry between them was undeniable, almost tangible, like a current running through the room. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, to understand the man behind the legend, but caution whispered in her mind, reminding her of the danger, the unpredictability, the consequences of letting herself fall into this intoxicating mix of attraction and intrigue. Alexander seemed to sense her hesitation. He leaned forward slightly, his hand brushing against hers, a deliberate, intimate gesture that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's okay to be afraid," he said softly, "but don't let fear blind you to possibility. You can step into something extraordinary without losing yourself. And I promise, Emma, I won't push you beyond your limits." "Not tonight." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint that this was a manipulation, a game, or a trap, but all she found was honesty, a vulnerability carefully hidden beneath the layers of control and power, and it disarmed her in a way she had never expected. She exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease slightly, allowing herself to lean just a fraction closer, drawn to him by forces she didn't yet understand but felt undeniably. I don't know what this is," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, "but I know I feel something." Alexander's eyes softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the intensity. "Then let yourself feel it," he murmured. "Tonight, there are no rules, no expectations, just this moment. You and me. That's all that matters." She nodded, and for the first time that night, allowed herself to simply exist in his presence, feeling the subtle brush of his hand, the faint warmth radiating from him, and the magnetic pull she couldn't explain. The distant fireworks continued outside, their bursts of light casting fleeting shadows across the room, but Emma barely noticed. All that mattered was the man in front of her, the connection that had sparked from a simple knock at the door, and the promise of a night that could change everything. Alexander tilted his head slightly, studying her, his gaze unwavering. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. Not because of who you know or what you do, but because of who you are. And that's rare. Her cheeks flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and thrill. Compliments from anyone else might have seemed hollow or rehearsed, but from him, they carried weight, significance, and an unexpected intimacy. She looked down, unsure how to respond, but Alexander didn't require an answer. Instead, he shifted slightly, closing the small distance between them just enough that she could feel the faint heat of his body, the deliberate brush of his hand against hers, and the undeniable pull that seemed to exist between them. For a moment, the outside world ceased to exist. The city, the fireworks, the celebrations, all faded into the background, leaving only the quiet intensity of their shared space, the magnetic tension of proximity, and the unspoken promise of what could come next. Emma realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that she was standing at the precipice of something she could never have predicted. The man before her, the infamous Alexander Romano, had entered her life in the most unlikely of ways, and already, she felt the weight of the inevitability of his presence. The night was young, but already it had transformed into an experience she would never forget, a story that had begun with a knock at midnight and now pulsed with the energy of possibility, desire, and the thrill of the unknown. Alexander's gaze softened further, and he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, the touch lingering just enough to make her heartbeat accelerate. "You don't have to understand everything right now," he said gently. "All that matters is that you're here, that you're present, and that you're willing to step into this night with me." Emma felt herself nodding almost involuntarily, realizing that she didn't need to understand it, didn't need to rationalize it. The night had taken a turn she never could have anticipated, and part of her wanted to embrace it fully, to explore the connection, the danger, the thrill, and the undeniable chemistry that had ignited in these first hours together. As the fireworks outside reached their crescendo, painting the sky in bursts of color, Emma felt a strange clarity settle over her. Tonight was a beginning, a moment suspended between fear and desire, uncertainty and anticipation, danger and intimacy, and she had no choice but to step forward, to let the night unfold, and to follow the pull of a man who had entered her life in the most impossible way. And as Alexander's hand remained close to hers, his presence unwavering, Emma realized that this New Year's Eve would mark the start of a story unlike any other, a night that would set the stage for secrets, romance, danger, and an intensity she had never imagined possible, all beginning with a single, fateful knock at her door. The minutes turned into hours, but in Emma's apartment, time seemed to exist on a different plane entirely, suspended by the magnetic tension between her and Alexander Romano. The initial shock of his presence had begun to settle into a complicated mixture of intrigue, excitement, and a trace of fear, one that Emma couldn't quite reconcile. She kept stealing glances at him, noticing the faint lines around his eyes, the precision in the way he adjusted his suit, the almost imperceptible way he observed everything around him while giving the illusion of relaxed composure. There was a power in him, a controlled force that radiated authority without shouting, without demanding. It simply existed, and Emma found herself drawn into it, feeling simultaneously safe and electrified. Alexander, for his part, seemed to sense the effect he had on her, though he did nothing overtly to push boundaries. Instead, he leaned casually against the edge of the couch, letting the silence stretch, punctuated only by the soft clinking of glasses as they sipped the champagne. "Do you always spend New Year's alone?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, teasing, yet carrying an edge of genuine curiosity that made her pulse quicken. She laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not always, but most years, yes. Work gets in the way, friends have plans, and I guess I've just gotten used to it." His gaze softened, thoughtful. "I never understood that. People shouldn't have to be alone on nights like this, especially not someone like you. You're too remarkable to be hidden away." The word hung in the air between them, and Emma felt heat rush to her cheeks. She wanted to argue, to downplay it, but something in the way he said it, calm, unshakable, almost intimate, made her hesitate. She realized that the danger she had imagined from Alexander Romano wasn't about him harming her. The danger was the unpredictability of his attention, the way his presence made her feel things she hadn't anticipated, things that left her vulnerable and alert all at once. "Alexander, I don't know why you're here," she whispered, the words tinged with both fear and wonder. "I don't even know what this is." He tilted his head slightly, studying her as if he could read every thought that flickered across her face. "Then let's not define it," he said softly. Tonight doesn't need labels. Tonight is about moments, about connection, about exploration. That's all. Emma felt a shiver run through her at the weight of those words. Exploration, connection, the promise of something real, something raw, something undeniable. And the fact that it came from Alexander Romano, the man whose name carried both reverence and fear in equal measure, made her pulse accelerate in a way she hadn't experienced before. She wanted to look away, to reclaim some sense of control, but she couldn't. His presence demanded attention, demanded proximity, and as he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over hers, the simple touch sent a thrill racing through her body. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the distant echoes of fireworks, fading in and out, and the faint hum of the city below. Emma realized she was studying him as intently as he studied her, memorizing the nuances of his expression, the subtle shifts in his posture, the way his voice could go from commanding to tender in a heartbeat. She didn't know why she was so captivated, but she knew she couldn't pull away, even if she wanted to. Alexander noticed her glance, and his half-smile deepened just slightly, a knowing curve that made her stomach flutter. "You're thinking," he said, his voice soft, teasing, yet grounded in certainty. "And that's good. I like it when you think, when you question, when you don't simply accept the world as it is." Emma blinked, caught off guard by the compliment, the acknowledgement, and the weight it carried. I don't even know what to say to that," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head, almost imperceptibly, and leaned back again, letting the tension between them build without words. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just be present. That's enough for tonight." And so she did. She let herself be, feeling the current between them, the subtle heat of proximity, and the inexplicable comfort of being with someone who, in another life, she would have feared, avoided, or ignored entirely. Yet here she was, enthralled, captivated, and undeniably alive in his presence. Hours seemed to pass in silence and quiet conversation, punctuated by laughter, teasing remarks, and fleeting moments of intimacy that left her heart racing. She found herself confiding in him, tentatively sharing small pieces of her life, of dreams, of fears, and he listened, not as a man trying to charm or manipulate, but as someone genuinely interested, attentive, and aware. It was unsettling, yet intoxicating. She realized, with a mixture of fear and anticipation, that the night had changed her perception of him entirely. Alexander Romano wasn't just a name, a legend, or a figure of fear. He was real, tangible, layered, and inescapably magnetic. And the knowledge that he had chosen to spend this night with her, that he had knocked on her door at midnight, that he had sought her out deliberately, made her feel both honored and dangerously vulnerable. As the city erupted again with the crescendo of fireworks, painting the night sky in brilliant bursts of light, Alexander leaned slightly closer, brushing a lock of hair from her face once more, the gesture tender yet charged with unspoken desire. Emma felt her breath hitch. She realized she was on the precipice of something she had never imagined, something thrilling, something frightening, something that could change the course of her life entirely. She wanted to pull back, to remind herself of the danger, the unpredictability, the reality of who he was, yet she couldn't. Something deep inside urged her forward, urged her to trust, to feel, to embrace the tension and the promise that lingered between them. "Emma," Alexander murmured, his lips just inches from her ear, his voice low and intimate, "tonight is just the beginning. You'll see. There's more to me, more to us, than you could possibly imagine. And if you're willing, we'll explore it together." The words, the proximity, the power behind them, left her stunned, breathless, and undeniably drawn in. She wanted to say yes, she wanted to step into the unknown with him, but the caution ingrained in her mind whispered warnings, reminders that the man beside her was as dangerous as he was captivating. Yet the desire, the thrill, the intensity of the moment outweighed every fear. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, acknowledging that she was ready to see where this night could lead. Alexander's eyes softened, the predatory edge giving way to something warmer, something reserved only for her, and for the first time, Emma allowed herself to feel the full weight of possibility, the thrill of danger, the lure of romance, and the magnetic pull of a connection that had begun with a single, unforgettable knock at midnight. And as they sat together, the city alive with celebration beyond their walls, Emma realized that this New Year's Eve had irrevocably altered the course of her life, that the man beside her, Alexander Romano, had opened a door she never imagined she would walk through, and that the night ahead was full of promise, tension, desire, and the intoxicating uncertainty of what it truly meant to step into the unknown with someone she had only just begun to understand. The city outside continued its New Year's celebration, fireworks exploding in brilliant colors that reflected against Emma's apartment windows, but inside, a different kind of fireworks ignited, a silent, electric tension that pulsed between her and Alexander Romano. She could feel it in every glance, every subtle movement, every measured breath he took, and it made her pulse race in ways she had never experienced before. She had spent the first hours of the evening caught between disbelief and curiosity, but now, as the minutes stretched into the early hours, a strange sense of intimacy had begun to form, fragile yet undeniable. Alexander sat back slightly, his dark eyes observing her, not with judgment, but with a focus that made her feel like the most important person in the world. "You're quieter now," he remarked, his voice soft yet commanding, carrying an undercurrent of amusement that made her heart skip. She tried to meet his gaze but found herself looking down instead, aware of the way her nerves fluttered under his scrutiny. I guess I'm just processing everything," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I never imagined anyone like you would ever care about a night like this, about me." The confession hung in the air, a vulnerable admission that both terrified and relieved her. Alexander leaned forward slightly, closing the distance without overwhelming her, and his hand brushed hers again, a simple touch, yet it sent a shiver through her body. "Emma," he said, his tone low and intimate, "you're remarkable. Not just tonight, but always. People like me don't usually notice, don't usually care, and yet, I noticed you. And I care." Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she wondered if she was imagining it, if this was some elaborate illusion designed to ensnare her in the dangerous world he inhabited. But the sincerity in his eyes, the warmth beneath the intensity, convinced her otherwise. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but every word felt inadequate, trivial compared to the weight of the moment. Instead, she let herself simply be present, feeling the electricity in the space between them, acknowledging the pull she couldn't resist. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying her with a mixture of curiosity and something softer, almost protective. "You're not like anyone else," he murmured. "Most people would run from this. From me. From what I represent. But you stayed. You didn't shy away. You're brave, Emma, even if you don't realize it." She felt her face flush at his words, both flattered and embarrassed, but she couldn't deny their truth. There had been fear, yes, but also a strange thrill at being in his presence, at stepping into the unknown with someone whose life was so far removed from hers. She realized that she had never felt so alive, so present, so acutely aware of herself and another person all at once. The apartment felt smaller, charged with a tension that made every glance, every breath, every brush of skin electric. Alexander's hand lingered near hers, not pressing, not demanding, just existing in proximity, and it was enough to leave her breathless. "Emma," he said softly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "tonight is just the beginning. What we're experiencing, it's rare, fragile, and powerful all at once. And I want to explore it with you, carefully, deliberately. Will you let me?" Her mind raced with doubts, fears, and questions, but the honesty in his eyes, the warmth in his tone, and the undeniable pull of attraction made her hesitate only briefly. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, feeling a thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. Alexander's gaze softened, and he leaned just a fraction closer, so that she could feel the faint warmth radiating from his body, a subtle brush of his presence that made her heart beat faster. "Good," he murmured. "There's no rush, no expectations. Just us, here, now, in this moment. We'll take it as it comes." The words were grounding, reassuring, and yet they carried a promise that both excited and unsettled her. She realized that the night had transformed into a delicate dance, a balance of tension and intimacy, attraction and caution, and she was both terrified and thrilled to be a part of it. As the distant fireworks continued to light up the city skyline, Alexander's hand finally found hers, not in a grasping, controlling way, but in a gesture of connection, gentle and deliberate. The touch was electric, sending warmth and awareness coursing through her, and she felt herself leaning slightly into it, drawn by a force she didn't yet understand. "I've never felt this way before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, though the confession carried more weight than she could have anticipated. Alexander's thumb brushed lightly over the back of her hand, a gesture so intimate and tender that it left her breathless. "Neither have I," he said softly, his dark eyes holding hers with a mixture of intensity and vulnerability. "And that's why tonight is important. Because it's ours, Emma. Just ours, without the chaos, without the outside world, without expectations." She realized that he was giving her something rare, attention without demand, presence without pressure, a connection that was as thrilling as it was dangerous, and she couldn't help but be captivated. For a long moment, they simply sat there, hands touching, eyes locked, sharing a silence that was filled with possibility and unspoken promises. The outside world, the city, the celebrations, the fireworks, faded into irrelevance, leaving only the two of them, suspended in a night that was charged with both danger and desire. Emma felt a strange combination of fear and exhilaration. She knew she was stepping into something she couldn't fully understand, that Alexander Romano's world was far more complicated, dark, and dangerous than hers, yet the pull was irresistible, magnetic, and undeniable. "I don't know where this is going," she admitted softly, "but I want to find out." Alexander's expression softened further, and he leaned slightly closer, so that the warmth of his presence enveloped her. "That's all I could ever ask for," he murmured. "Trust me, Emma, and we'll navigate this together. Carefully, deliberately, but together." She nodded, feeling her heartbeat align with the intensity of the moment, aware that her life had irrevocably shifted from the ordinary to something extraordinary, unpredictable, and utterly compelling. The night stretched before them, full of possibilities, suspense, and unspoken desires, and she realized that the connection forged in these first hours would be the foundation for events that could change everything. Her understanding of love, trust, danger, and desire, all ignited by a knock at midnight and the presence of the man who had chosen her to share this rare, electrifying moment. And as the fireworks outside faded into the night, Emma Harris understood, in a way that terrified and thrilled her simultaneously, that her life had begun a new chapter, one that would be filled with intrigue, romance, danger, and the intoxicating pull of a man who had entered her world in the most unforgettable way possible. The city had quieted somewhat, the last of the fireworks fading into distant echoes, but the intensity in Emma's apartment remained electric, palpable, and undeniably magnetic. Alexander Romano sat across from her on the edge of the couch, his presence commanding yet relaxed, and every subtle movement he made seemed calculated to draw her attention while giving her space, a paradox that both frustrated and thrilled her. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her, that piercing gaze that seemed to strip away every pretense she had carefully constructed in her life, revealing a vulnerability she hadn't known she possessed. Her pulse raced with a mix of fear, curiosity, and something far more dangerous, desire. She tried to focus on mundane things, the clink of the glasses, the soft hum of the refrigerator, but every sound, every motion was filtered through the lens of Alexander's presence, and she realized that she hadn't felt this acutely alive in years. "You're thinking again," he said, his voice low, teasing, yet carrying that undercurrent of power that made her heartbeat accelerate. She looked down, biting her lip, trying to focus on anything other than the warmth radiating from him, the subtle electricity that crackled every time their hands brushed. "I can't help it," she admitted softly. "Everything about you, everything about this, it's so overwhelming." He smiled, a small, knowing smile that made her stomach flutter. "Good," he murmured. "Then let yourself feel it. Let yourself be here, now, without question, without hesitation. That's all I want from you tonight." Emma felt her breath hitch at his words, at the deliberate intimacy in his tone, at the unspoken promise behind them. She wanted to ask questions, to understand his motives, to rationalize why someone like Alexander Romano would care about a night like this, about her, but the words caught in her throat, irrelevant in the face of the intensity that enveloped them. Instead, she focused on the moment, on the subtle brush of his hand against hers, the warmth of his presence, and the magnetic pull she could neither resist nor ignore. Alexander leaned back slightly, his eyes never leaving hers, and she felt exposed in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. "Do you realize," he said softly, "that tonight is more than just a beginning? It's a test, a challenge, and an opportunity all at once. Life has a way of presenting us with choices, and this is one of them. You can step forward, or you can retreat. The choice is yours." Emma felt a shiver run down her spine at his words. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, it was a truth delivered with precision, and the weight of it made her pulse quicken. She realized that she didn't want to retreat, that the thrill of stepping into the unknown, into his world, into this night, was far more compelling than the safety of the familiar. I want to step forward, she whispered, almost to herself, and Alexander's expression softened, the intensity giving way to a rare warmth reserved just for her. He leaned closer, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, and his hand found hers again, a gentle, grounding touch that sent electricity coursing through her veins. Good, he murmured, his voice low, intimate, sending a shiver down her spine. Then we move forward together. Carefully, but with intent. The words resonated with her, the deliberate choice of every syllable creating a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. She realized that she trusted him, partly because of the way he made her feel, partly because of the sincerity in his eyes, and partly because she had no choice but to be captivated by him. For a long moment, they simply sat there, hands touching, eyes locked, breathing in the charged atmosphere of their shared space. Emma felt the tension building, a delicate balance of fear, desire, and anticipation that left her acutely aware of every nerve, every pulse, every subtle movement. Alexander's gaze softened, and he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face with deliberate tenderness. Emma, he murmured, his lips just inches from hers, tonight is about connection. About feeling. About acknowledging that the extraordinary can exist even in the most unlikely of circumstances. And you're part of that extraordinary moment. She felt a warmth flood her cheeks, a fluttering in her stomach that left her breathless, and for the first time, she allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, drawn in by forces she couldn't name but could not resist. Alexander noticed, of course, and the faintest curve of his lips suggested both approval and anticipation, a promise unspoken but understood. The apartment felt smaller, charged with a tension that made the air thick, the space between them almost tangible, a living, breathing entity that neither could ignore. Emma realized that she was on the edge of a choice far greater than anything she had ever faced, to retreat into the safety of the ordinary or to step fully into the unknown with a man whose world was as dangerous as it was intoxicating. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, despite the whirlwind of questions in her mind, she felt compelled to move closer, to explore the energy that crackled between them, to trust the connection that had begun with a simple knock at midnight and had since grown into something she couldn't ignore. Alexander's hand lingered near hers, his presence commanding without demanding, a paradox that left her both frustrated and exhilarated. "Do you feel it?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "The intensity of this moment." She nodded, unable to form words, and he smiled, the expression deepening into something intimate, almost vulnerable. "Good," he said softly. "Then let yourself experience it. Don't fight it. Don't overthink. Just feel." Emma exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just slightly, allowing herself to exist fully in his presence, to acknowledge the pull, the desire, the unspoken promise, and the thrill of the unknown. The night stretched on, full of possibilities, suspense, and the intoxicating tension between them. And as the city outside finally began to quiet, as the fireworks faded into memory and the streets emptied, Emma Harris understood that this New Year's Eve was unlike any she had ever known, that her life had shifted irrevocably in the span of a single night, and that Alexander Romano, the man of danger, power, and enigma, had opened a door into a world she could not have imagined but now could not resist. Every heartbeat, every glance, every brush of skin reminded her that her life had changed forever, and that the story that had begun with a knock at midnight was only just unfolding, promising romance, tension, danger, and a connection that neither of them could deny or escape. The night had deepened into the early hours, but Emma's apartment seemed suspended in its own private world, untouched by the distant hum of the city or the fading echoes of New Year's celebrations. The air between her and Alexander Romano was charged, electric, a taut thread of tension and anticipation that neither dared to break but both instinctively responded to. She could feel the warmth radiating from him as he sat near her, the subtle brush of his hand against hers sending shivers down her spine, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the room like a promise she couldn't yet name. Alexander leaned back slightly, studying her with those dark, intense eyes that seemed to pierce through every carefully constructed layer she had built around herself, exposing vulnerabilities and desires she had long buried. "Emma," he said softly, his voice low and deliberate, "do you realize how rare moments like this are? How rare it is to find someone who can exist in my world without fear, without pretense, someone who can see me for what I am and still." He paused, his gaze locking with hers, "want to be here." She felt her heart hammer in her chest, a mixture of awe, fear, and longing threatening to overwhelm her. She wanted to speak, to tell him she was terrified, that she had no idea where this was going, that she shouldn't feel what she was feeling, but the words seemed meaningless in the face of the intensity radiating from him. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging both the truth of his statement and her own readiness to surrender to the moment, however unpredictable or dangerous it might be. Alexander's expression softened, and he leaned slightly closer, a subtle movement that sent heat pooling in her stomach, and for a long, suspended moment, all that existed was the quiet proximity, the brush of skin against skin, the electricity of attraction and unspoken understanding that neither could deny. "You know," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I've walked through countless rooms, countless lives, countless opportunities, and I've rarely encountered someone who makes me pause, someone who makes me reconsider everything I thought I knew about control, about power, about connection." Emma felt her breath hitch. The vulnerability in his tone, the sincerity behind his words, made her realize how extraordinary this night truly was, how rare and improbable it was that Alexander Romano, the man whose life was built on authority, danger, and precision, had chosen her to share these early hours with. She wanted to reach out, to close the distance completely, to bridge the invisible gap that had been charged with tension all night, but she hesitated, aware of the danger, aware of the unpredictability, yet unable to resist the magnetic pull drawing her toward him. Alexander seemed to sense her hesitation. He tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips, and gently reached for her hand, holding it lightly, deliberately, without demanding, without rushing. The contact was electric, and Emma felt a thrill she had never experienced, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a deep, undeniable connection that left her breathless. "You're extraordinary, Emma," he murmured, brushing a lock of hair from her face with careful tenderness, his dark eyes holding hers with a warmth that contrasted with his formidable reputation. "And tonight, you've shown me more than most people ever will, patience, courage, honesty, and a strength I didn't expect to see in someone like you." The words struck her with a force she hadn't anticipated, making her pulse accelerate and her cheeks flush. She realized in that moment that her life had irrevocably shifted. The night had begun with a simple knock at her door, an unexpected visit from a man whose world was as dangerous as it was thrilling, and had evolved into something far more complex, far more intoxicating than she could have imagined. She felt drawn to him in ways that frightened her, that exhilarated her, that made every rational thought dissolve into the dizzying current of emotion and tension that had carried them through the night. Alexander's hand remained near hers, a grounding presence, and he leaned ever so slightly closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the quiet power in his proximity, and the unspoken promise that hung in the air between them. "Emma," he whispered, his lips almost brushing her ear, "tonight is only the beginning. What we've started, what's begun here, it's rare, delicate, and powerful. And if you're willing, we'll explore it together. Step by step, moment by moment, without fear." She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling, feeling the weight of the moment, the magnetic pull, the thrill of the unknown, and realized she wanted nothing more than to step into it, to trust him, to explore the connection that had ignited from a single, fateful midnight knock. When she opened her eyes, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart race, a mixture of command and tenderness that left her breathless, and she allowed herself to lean slightly toward him, bridging the final inches of space between them. Their proximity was electric, charged with unspoken questions, desire, and possibilities neither fully understood, yet both were willing to explore. Alexander's hand moved to lightly brush her cheek, a gesture intimate and deliberate, and she felt a thrill of anticipation course through her. "Emma," he said, his voice husky, intimate, "you've changed this night for me. You've reminded me that connection, trust, and vulnerability are rarer than power, danger, or control. And I want more, if you'll let me." She met his gaze, fully aware of the risks, fully conscious of the whirlwind of danger and desire surrounding him, and yet she nodded, unable to resist, willing to follow where the night, and he, would lead. He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression, and the tension in the room shifted subtly, becoming warmer, more intimate, yet still charged with anticipation. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in, closing the last of the distance, and Emma felt her breath catch, her body alert, her mind racing, and yet completely surrendering to the moment. And then, finally, their lips met, a gentle, tentative touch at first, but charged with everything that had built between them over the night, curiosity, desire, tension, and a fragile trust. The kiss deepened, a slow, deliberate exploration, and Emma felt herself melting into it, into him, into the intensity that had defined their night. Time seemed to stop, the world outside fading entirely, leaving only the two of them in the charged intimacy of a moment that felt like both a beginning and a culmination. When they finally pulled back, their foreheads resting together, breathing mingling, she realized that she had never experienced anything like it, never felt so alive, so seen, so desired, and yet so safe, paradoxically, with someone who embodied danger, power, and mystery in equal measure. Alexander's hand remained on her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin, and he whispered, "This is just the start, Emma. Our story has only begun, and I promise, it will be extraordinary." She nodded, her heart full, her mind racing, and for the first time in years, she felt completely, undeniably certain of something, that her life had shifted irreversibly, that Alexander Romano had brought danger, desire, and an unforgettable intensity into her world, and that together, they would navigate the unknown, the thrilling, the intoxicating, and the unforgettable journey that had begun with a single midnight knock. The city outside continued to hum softly, distant and indifferent, as Emma and Alexander remained close, suspended in the rare, fragile, and powerful connection they had forged, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again, and yet both willing, excited, and eager to see where this extraordinary night, and their extraordinary bond, would lead.